Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Living in My Shadow podcast. I'm Sandra Wallace, the OCD coach, and I am both privileged and honored to have a guest here today. Her name is AJ, who's going to speak on her journey living with anorexia. And I just want to take a moment to welcome her, and I'm very, very grateful to have you, AJ. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Greetings from the beautiful Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. Hi.
Hi. So we're going to dive right in. My first question for you today is, who is AJ Nova?
Thank you. Yes, AJ Nova, me, is a girl who's a anorexia nervosa survivor. At 12 years old, I began dieting, and then by 13, things were so bad that I almost killed myself by not eating enough. And through trials and tribulations and power of family, power of prayer and recovery, I'm here with you today because I am not only a survivor, I am a thriver. We want to be more than survivors.
Nice.
We want to thrive in this world. And whether or not you're Christian, you're Catholic, I grew up in Catholic faith, whether you believe in a higher power or not, I know that most people want to have a purpose. They want to be more than just existing on this planet. And I'm here to share my story because one of the biggest ahas for me through this experience was to realize that I had to go through that ordeal so that I could be sharing my story today with others, and that I could be helping people who perhaps are suffering in silence, are somewhere in isolation, are maybe like I was, ashamed of what happened, surrounded by family who didn't understand, who didn't know what to do, who was scared. And when I got better, I just swept everything under the rug. That happens a lot because we're not educated. Today, there are so many resources in the US and in Canada and all over the world for people suffering from eating disorders. And all we have to do is be brave enough to say, I think I may have a problem, or I think someone I love is suffering and may have a problem, and I don't know what to do. Because, and I'll tell you more later, we lose someone to an eating disorder every 62 seconds. And those are statistics provided by NEDA, the National Eating Disorder Association here in the United States. But that's one statistic. You know, I looked at Canada, knowing, Sandra, that you are located in Canada, because I know we met in the United States, but you're in the beautiful Canada.
Yes.
And I wanted to prepare some data for you and your listeners. And about 1 million Canadians, actually, and this is coming from the statistics by National Initiative for Eating Disorders. So if you can believe it, about 1 million Canadians have a diagnosis of an eating disorder. That includes anorexia nervosa, what I had, that includes bulimia, that includes binge eating disorder, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, and the so-called other specified feeding and eating disorders. So we certainly have an audience out there, and it is my mission to help not just young women, because we often think of young Caucasian privileged women when we think of eating disorders, but others too. You know, 10% of eating disorder sufferers are men when it comes to anorexia, and 30% are men when it comes to bulimia. So I am intimately acquainted with anorexia, but I'm learning about other disorders as I write my book, as I interview people from my book, from my upcoming book. It's we have an audience, and the message is there, and we can not only survive, because those are mental illnesses, but we can also thrive.
Yes, yes. Very interesting. I didn't realize the statistics were so high. And when you said every 60, how many seconds?
62 seconds, someone dies. Yes.
So
Yes.
literally, we're talking seconds. Every second counts, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you need to
Hmm.
have that intervention and reach out. And that's probably the hardest thing to do is acknowledge that we need help. I know even with my obsessive compulsive disorder before I was diagnosed, I went from walk-in clinic to walk-in clinic trying to find the answer. I knew I needed help, but I didn't know what that help looked like and who was going to
Right.
provide it. So I totally get that. And I'm grateful that you mentioned that. Now, when you say, and again, we use these words interchangeably, anorexia nervosa, bulimia, and all these other ones that you had mentioned too. But what, for our listeners wanting to know, or maybe they're in a position right now where they wonder if they have an eating disorder, what are eating disorders? Can you tell us a little bit more, dive in a little bit deeper on the characteristics?
Sure.
Mhm.
Sure, and that's a very good question because I kind of thought I knew what I'm talking about when I finally, after several decades, became brave enough to write about my experiences.
Right.
Turns out that we hear a lot of things, but we misinterpret, or we make certain associations, and then we go just with that. So you have your eating disorders, and you have disordered eating. And disordered eating can lead to eating disorders, and you can have an eating disorder and disordered eating. So if you think of like yo-yo dieting, for
Yeah.
example, or somebody, I also work in the fashion industry, so I'm surrounded by dresses and women trying dresses on, and I often hear about oh, I'm getting married, I need to go on a crash diet, kind of those juice cleanses that can all become disordered eating. But an eating disorder is a mental illness. So
Mhm.
oftentimes, I know when I wasn't eating and I was 13 years old, and then 14 when my family caught on that something is wrong, they would just say, well, just eat something, have a banana, just eat something.
Yes.
Well, it's not about the food, really. There's a wonderful book called The Trap of Anorexia. And it talks about how it's all in your head. And indeed it is. It's a mental illness.
Mhm.
And with anorexics, it's often the feeling of not having control of your life. And you're trying to find a way to control something. And, being an OCD coach, you know a lot about that need for control. The thought of what if is so prevalent in with someone who's suffering from OCD. But with anorexia, I remember it's just food is what you latch onto and is what you can control, and not eating. The perfectionistic tendencies in a personality that falls into the anorexia category. I was 13, and 120% of my time was spent on planning my day, how not to eat, how to make it look to my grandparents and my grandma and aunts and uncles and everybody around me that I was eating, but I
Mhm.
wasn't really. Because even in my sleep, and studies now are showing that anorexics will spend time while sleeping, still planning and thinking about food. With someone who's bulimic means that, yeah, you eat normally, but you purge.
Yeah.
So you might use your fingers or a toothbrush to make sure that you vomit soon after you
Mhm.
eat. Um, or you can use laxatives to help you with that as
Right.
well. And then you have your binge eating disorder where you just eat a lot, a lot. You have a banquet full of food, and then you feel bad about yourself. You're using
Yes.
food to mask emotions, often trauma that you're not ready to deal with, that you don't want to deal with, that you can't deal with. And so it's all up here. It really hardly ever is about food. I like food. I
Mhm.
love chocolate. I enjoy, good wine. Um, I'm Polish American. I love pierogi and all the good
Yeah.
stuff there
Yeah.
too. So it's, it's not about the food, it's about here.
Mm.
And there, if someone who's suffering from an eating disorder needs to be seen by professionals.
Right.
I unfortunately never had that privilege when I was a child. So I grew up in Poland. My parents worked in the United States, so we
Mm.
didn't see each other for a period of years. And my grandmother, my grandparents raised me. So when I started having a problem, and then I finally moved to the United States, and my parents recognized, because they saw how skinny I was, that there was a problem. They, being immigrants and a language barrier, new country, they didn't know who to turn to. Today, I can, having done these interviews also in Polish language, and I have mothers who reach out to me saying, if something's wrong, I don't know what to do. Where do I go? With insurance, the way it is in the United States, it also depends what kind of treatments we can get you. But there are specific treatments. You need to see a nutritionist, a certified dietitian. You need to see a regular doctor. You need to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It's a team that works with you because while it is a mental illness, we have to very much address what's here. We also have to address the physical. If you are terribly underweight, if you are losing electrolytes, if you're losing strength, if you're losing hair like me, if you had really bad teeth, those things have to be addressed as well. So it's a team effort, but it's very much first and foremost a recognized mental illness.
Wow. And you were saying this all started at 13, but your parents didn't recognize it till you were 14. So I was just thinking timelines, like a whole year went by, and these were the behaviors that you were doing to try and control. Wow.
Right.
So where was the breaking point, do you feel, or when did you start to get the help?
Good question. Let me backtrack before, because there's something that I really want to mention that comes up in my book as well, and it's the power of words. I was about 5th grade, so 12 years old when I started dieting, because someone I loved and respected, my beloved aunt, told me that I had thunder thighs like my mom. And before then, I didn't really pay attention to fashion. I was in 5th grade. I had other things to worry about, like getting straight A's and being involved in church groups and doing, I did Latin American ballroom dancing. I was in Girl Scouts in Poland, plenty of going on. But in 5th grade, things are beginning to change. Your body is changing. Maybe you're a little bit more aware of how you look and how people around you look. And that was around the time, again, growing up in Poland, where communism, things were shifting. So we began to get more Western TV, access to Western programs. And I think I remember that show Dynasty coming on and just other influences. I think maybe MTV was already happening, just different influences from the West. So we got to see more. And I took her comment to heart. And now today as an adult, I'm almost 44 and I've gone through therapy, and I currently work with a wonderful specialist in eating disorders because I still need help. Because unfortunately, while these things can be really addressed, with anorexia, once anorexic, always anorexic. And actually writing this book has triggered me. I had to take a break and just address my mental health. But, I understand that my aunt, who's no longer with us, she had her own set of insecurities as an adult person, and she just projected them onto me. Did I have bigger thighs? Maybe. I don't know. I was in 5th grade. Who cares?
Yeah, that's right. Good attitude. But at the time, that's hard.
At the time, not no. And so what I did was, it was very innocent, and it often is at the beginning. We start eliminate things. So I said, okay, so I like cookies. So I would maybe phase away cookies. Then, because I'm Catholic, I follow Lent, so I would give up chocolate for Lent. And that went really well, so I started giving up everything sweet for Lent. So do you see how it's kind of getting a bit of a slippery slope? And then I started releasing some weight, and all of a sudden my other aunts and friends and their moms are saying, oh, AJ, you'd lost a few kilos. You're looking really good. And all of a sudden, for someone who was always just the smart one, I was praised for my intelligence and my good grades. All of a sudden I'm being praised for my looks. Now that is new. That's intoxicating. That positive reinforcement. Oh my goodness. And remember, my parents were abroad, so kind of that healthy ecosystem that your parents can often provide, they unfortunately couldn't do that from far away. Of course, letters and telephone conversations are wonderful, but it started that I was more driven. My personality is such that you kind of, if you see that something's working, you go with more with that. And then I found out that I would be moving to the United States, which was always a goal for our family to be reunited.
Nice.
And that was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But now through therapy, I also know that I felt like I was losing even more control over my life. Because first my grandmother moved, and then I had to finish 7th grade, and I would move too. And on one hand, there's this excitement to be reunited with my parents. On the other hand, it's a new world, it's a new country, everything is new. I mean, to a 7th, 8th grader, new friends, changing schools, much, let alone changing continents.
Yes,
There was a lot of
very
that.
Traumatizing.
It can be.
Yeah.
And so my anxiety and all of that led to not eating. I started eating less and less, and it was all combined with a positive reinforcement. And, to a point where I have visual aid. This is a cut up apple. I would live on an apple a day. And I'm not going to tell you how much I weighed at my lowest, because I'm not here to get a gold star as a perfect anorexic. But it was not a lot. No. This is not a lot of food for a 13-year-old. And I learned that if you cut up an apple, it looks like I'm eating more. And then you can make a lot of noises when you eat an apple and make sure that everybody sees you're eating something. So they think that you're eating and you're getting the nutrition you need. So when I moved here to the United States, I started 8th grade here. My parents immediately knew that something was wrong. I remember my mom's first words were, "Oh my goodness, she's so skinny." And writing this book now and talking to my mom, we realized how much of this stuff we blocked mentally. Because that trauma, we kind of wanted to go away. But, I asked her if she was brave enough to kind of think about what was going through her head when she saw me. And she said, you were just too skinny. And then observing me those first few days and weeks, she said, I knew something was wrong. I knew that we failed you as a parent, and we had to do something to help you. But we didn't know what to do. We were flying blind. So, they tried different things. They tried taking me to, there was a woman who was selling nutritional supplements, shakes. And I remember my mom taking me to her, and I was not having it. You couldn't tell me I had a problem. I remember sitting in a chair like this, thinking, what is this lady? She's here infringing upon my authority. I don't have a problem. I don't want your shakes. Leave me alone. I maybe said 2 sentences to her. Now, I was always a very good, polite child, but this was not, I don't have a problem.
You felt,
My mom bought those supplements, those shakes, and she said, well, but you and I can drink them so we can both get healthy. That was a miserable failure. That didn't work. So the good thing that happened that helped me was finding a way to regain some control over my life. Again, I didn't know that was really at the core of the issue. Another issue was I felt abandoned by my parents when I was in Poland, and I didn't know that. Only in therapy later that came out. I knew that my parents are doing what they're doing to help us lead a better life. But subconsciously, my inner child felt abandoned. So once I was reunited with them, you would think things would get better, but they didn't. All of a sudden, I felt smothered by my parents. All of a sudden, they became helicopter parents. I'm an only child. They haven't seen me in years. I have no freedom. They're observing everything. I can't pretend like I am not eating. But what helped was me joining a theater company, or a volunteer theater group for children in Polish language. I missed being on stage. I always had a very heavy brain. I needed to balance things out with creative activities. And a friend mentioned that there was a theater here in Chicago, and maybe I should go and see what happens at rehearsals. And I did, and I loved it, and I stayed.
Nice.
So that, and I didn't know how pivotal that would be, but belonging to a theater, being able to perform in Polish, gave me some control of my life. Because what's happening in behind the scenes is I'm trying to learn English. I'm trying to survive 8th grade. I came in not knowing English.
Wow.
I was a straight A honor student in Poland, and coming here, I was an F student. I did well in math because you don't need to speak the language to understand math necessarily.
Wow.
But everything else was a challenge. So again, I'm losing control. Helicopter parents,
Yeah.
rightfully so. I had problems, but
Yeah.
also not knowing the language. That was tough. But being in theater and loving those Saturday afternoon rehearsals, and then we were performing on stage in front of hundreds of people, that was wonderful.
Oh.
That gave me a sense of control. So that helped. That's a long way to answer your question, Sandra.
No, that's beautiful.
But again, this only came up in therapy because as a child, I never had that therapy. Only as an adult when I realized I never really healed. So that helped. And once I started regaining a bit of control over my life, my parents happened to hear that finding a food that I enjoyed might also be that pivotal thing that might help me. And it happened so that we did find it. It was granola cereal with raisins.
Oh, nice.
Just silly granola cereal with raisins. I loved it so much that I would have a bowl for breakfast and for lunch during weekdays,
Nice.
and maybe even for dessert. So that's what helped me kind of turn things around. But it was immediate. Remember, at this point, I was 2 years into this. Again, not thinking that I have a problem, being in control of everything, being 13 and 14 years old.
So young. And even the feeling with your parents being away, like they did what was best for the entire family, but I can't help but wonder, was there a feeling of rejection, or why am I not with my parents at that age? That can be really hard to deal with. And even though you have other family around, no one can replace your parents, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's a whole generation of us, Eastern European kids and other kids who grew up under the communist regime, whose parents did that. They went abroad and they came back, and they went abroad and they came back. But flying at that time was very expensive. So it had to be a strategic choice to like my dad missed my first communion, unfortunately, but those are the kind of choices you had to make at that time.
For sure.
And again, this isn't to blame my parents.
No,
it's just stating with therapy the triggers that happen to me that often are what trigger people. It's I listened to your podcast and you mentioned trauma growing up in a household. And as children, we react certain ways. And you developed OCD, I developed anorexia. And it's just, I'm here because we need to talk about these things. Our secrets keep us sick. And there's a beautiful book by a doctor, by an MD, called Sick Enough. And I read that book, and then I listened to it. And in it, she talks about how when somebody comes in to see, an ER physician or a doctor with an eating disorder, then they don't look how one might think an eating disorder person, sufferer, might look. They might not get the treatment they need because they BMI, them body mass index is fine because they're bigger, they're not Caucasian, they're not that thin. Gosh, but you are sick enough. You're sick enough to be listened to. You're sick enough to be treated, to be heard, to be taken seriously.
And that might be the only one opportunity that a person has that chance to get help for a long, long time going forward. And it saddens me to think that we miss those opportunities because people aren't educated enough, or they don't know what to ask, or they're in a hurry, or they make assumptions. But it never hurts to ask and learn and do a very thorough assessment for the person.
Right. You know, my parents,
Sure.
again, they just knew something was wrong. I don't know that they've heard of anorexia. I mean, later on, it became, I think, public knowledge that Princess Diana was bulimic. But at
Yes.
the time, you know, when I was growing up, I- that wasn't something that we, you know, I knew about or we talked about.
Yes.
So, you know, I'm writing a book on eating disorders. I'm not a doctor, but I am someone who suffered through it. And what really made me make this decision a few months ago was, you know, 10 years ago, someone told me, you have a book, you should write a book. I wasn't ready.
No.
I just wasn't. But a few months ago, I was talking to a dear friend of mine whose daughter is 12, I'm 13. And, you know, she was sharing the anorexia story of her child. And I'm sitting there and I can't believe it. It's been 30 years since what I went through. And this little girl, or young woman now, is going through the exact same thing. And that's what told me I have to speak up. This has not gone away. Especially now with social media, everything being filtered, you know, thigh gaps, all these things that are influencing us, whether we know what they do or not. We have to talk about these things. People are dying, people are miserable, people are giving themselves such health issues. It's okay to think about it, it's to talk about it. It's not shameful. Please seek help. If you need to talk to someone, please email me. If you need to seek help, there are wonderful free resources. I can send them to you, whether you're in Canada, in the United States, in European Union, wherever in the world. There is help out there. You're worthy.
Yes.
You're worthy, you're worthy, you're worthy.
Oh, thank you, AJ. That was important to say. So thank you. And, you know, I wanted to ask you about the social media presence, because that is more present and more prominent now than ever, because we have access to the Google searches and the pictures and everything else, right? So when I asked you, and I think you've, my next question was why a book on eating disorders, but you have covered that to some point. But the book itself, can you just, I'm anxious to know a little bit more about the book. Do you break it down in chapters and it's sort of a journey of your own? And then maybe just give us a little glimpse into it, because once it's out, I'm definitely going to purchase it.
Thank you. The book started as a brave step, sort of a therapy for me, just to sharing my story. But as I started to talk about my story on various media platforms, I had people reach out to me with their journeys, or, you know, current or past, or that a lot of moms are reaching out to me about their 12, 13, 14 year olds too. And I realized that this isn't about me. This is much bigger than who I am. And so my book has themes, and within each theme, kind of which several chapters into each theme, like the power of words, the importance of self-love and self-acceptance. I include stories, my story, tidbits about my experience, and then that of others. I have a testimonial of a beautiful woman who is now a coach who struggled with bulimia, and she actually died and was brought back after a accident during a triathlon. She was a Division A athlete, and she had to lose some weight in order to not to lose her scholarship, for example. She had to go through some very severe, bulimic experiences because her coach told her, not so directly, but not exactly in a subtle way, hey, that freshman 15, it's got to go. So there is a story about a woman who was living in the UK at the time with a boyfriend who was doing really well business-wise, and they were kind of rubbing elbows with the jet set there. And he told her, "You're always going to be this big Polish woman living in the UK," and essentially calling her fat. And she was gorgeous. And this fat shaming, that's another thing, it's got to stop. We need to stop with the fat phobia. But there is something that's called pretty privilege and thin privilege. And she took his words to heart, again, the power of words, and became stick thin. And showed me the photos to prove it. So there are stories of people to kind of show the 360 view of eating disorders, because it's not one size fits all. It's not, some debutante from a privileged family who's Caucasian white, and this is just something that rich people do. Absolutely not. We have plenty of men who are being influenced into eating disorders by what they see. We have plenty of women my age, your age, in every age group who are suffering. I am in various Facebook pages, kind of safe fora for people with eating disorders. And like me, many have either never gotten treatment or have not been properly diagnosed or had to stop treatment because of financial concerns. And they boomerang back. And they live with that shame and that disappointment, and also that lack of understanding by others, because you hear this so much: just eat something. It's all in your head. Just stop it. Just stop it. And it's like, well, it is all in my head.
If it was only that easy, we would have done it long time ago, and we wouldn't be here today talking about it either.
I wouldn't be 43 writing a book and deciding I need to go on a diet and immediately because I get triggered. So, to just give you an example, I recently did a photo shoot for my book and for my website, a professional photo shoot. And my first thought was, okay, so I need to put shapewear on. Thank you, Spanx. And my second thought was, gosh, I just 2 days crash diet. That's all I need to do. And I stopped myself because I'm an adult with therapy and tools that I know how to use to stop myself from doing that. But those were my first and second thoughts. Like, oh my goodness, we're so pre-programmed to think that we have to look a certain way. And I'm here talking to you and your listeners because I'm not perfect. I'm not. I'm still anorexic at heart. I just have the tools to help me live my life without sliding back. For example, a lot of people are experiencing success dieting using intermittent fasting, which is when you eat and then you don't eat for several hours. I know that is something that I could never do because it would trigger me. I would be so good at intermittent fasting. It would become all fasting all day. And you know what? There was a point in my life when I thought that's shameful to admit, but it's not. It's just being aware of your limits and of your weaknesses and of your triggers. And that's what it is. I wear this pin, a butterfly pin.
I was just going to ask you that when we were done this part.
Oh, thank you.
I would love to know.
Well, thank you. A, I love butterflies, but B, this is a symbol of metamorphosis. Before becoming a butterfly, you're in this cocoon. And that was me hiding from my experience of anorexia, of the eating disorders that I've done. I've done my fear of occasional binge eating too, which is not uncommon because you starve your body so much, then you just kind of 180 and eat a lot. But I survived, I'm thriving. I'm not perfect, but I'm my own kind of perfect and beautiful. And so can you be.
And you're beautiful just the way you are. And I just love to know that, like, when you were going to do your photo shoot, it is interesting how we go back to to the old mindset. But you're
Mhm.
right, with the right tools, you can stop yourself. And the awareness is probably one of the biggest things, is being aware of knowing that that is happening and occurring, and be able to do that pivotal shift. I think that's wonderful. Very, very good. So the next question is, how do you help people? Can you tell us a little bit about, like, the book is going to be amazing. That's going to reach out to, that'll be worldwide. You'll be helping someone reading that. And I can't wait for that. But up till now, what are some of the ways, like, you've done public speaking, you've been on TV shows, was it, and radio, both? And,
Yes,
and in the
yes.
language, in the Polish language, like, that is such a barrier sometimes for people because they can't speak the language. And you're going out and sharing with the world in your own language, and having that history is amazing. But is there other ways that you're doing things in your community or traveling to bring awareness?
Yes, I do a lot of coaching. So I
Okay.
provide safe space for people, to talk about what's going through or what their loved ones, their children, um, are going through. Because a lot of times people don't know where to start. And I'm not a doctor, but I can definitely talk to you and point you in the right direction, give you resources, but also work with you on your stress levels. I'm a big believer in a modality called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique tapping. So I use EFT on my own self when I get triggered, when I want to start dieting, or when crazy things happen and I'm just like, oh, I put on weight during COVID and oh my goodness. So I work with people to relieve their stress.
Mhm.
With eating disorder community, public events, family gatherings, whether it's
Yeah.
Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
In the United States, there are holidays like 4th of July, for
Yes.
example, where it's all about grilling or barbecuing and being with your loved ones. For people suffering from eating disorders, those are high stress level times. Not just being there, if they do end up going,
Mhm.
which often they don't. But the time leading to such an event,
Yes.
mentally preparing, making decisions, like if you're an anorexic, how are you going to avoid eating? How will you make it look like you're eating? How can you avoid people's comments or questions? If you're bulimic, you're thinking, is there a bathroom I can go to purge? What
Yes.
am I going to do? If binge eating is something that you suffer from, am I going to be triggered by the amount of food at the picnic table?
Yeah.
All those things can be addressed if we do EFT tapping. So I don't know if you're familiar with that
Yes, I am,
modality.
and I've tried it myself. Can you just give us like a little bit of a example?
Sure. So with tapping, we have these meridian points on our body. They go parallel. It doesn't matter if you go on your right or on your left, and you don't have to do both. We have points here on your eyebrow and over
Mhm.
here under your eye, under your nose, on your chin, right here, and then for women and men, but for women like on the side, kind of where your bra strap is,
Mhm.
and then we end up here. So what we do is we started a karate chop, and we would come up with a phrase. For example, even though I feel very fat right now and I just don't want to eat for a day, I deeply and completely love and accept myself and I'm okay. And we repeat that phrase 3 times. And if the words I deeply and completely love and accept myself and I'm okay don't resonate, you can cut out the I'm okay part. But
Mhm.
we do ask that you stay with I love and accept myself. And I know that might not feel true. That actually might feel like a total lie. Just go with it. We
Mhm.
want to go through the emotions. And
Okay.
then we go through each point and we vocalize what we feel. For example, I looked in the mirror and I feel fat.
Mhm.
I'm disgusting. I put on 3 pounds. I can't go to the party. I'm so stressed out. I'm not good enough. I should just stay home. And those are the negative things that we go through. And then we cycle through the points and then we go to the more positive reinforcements. And then we say, for example, but I am worthy of enjoying life. I can go and be with people. Food can feel safe for me.
Mm.
I don't, food can feel safe for me. I don't have to hate myself.
Mm.
It's okay to love myself.
Mhm.
It's okay to be nervous, but nervous is normal. And we go through cycles of this tapping, and it just vocalizing and touching these points can really bring your anxiety level down. So usually I would ask someone at the beginning before we start a session, from on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being super duper anxious and stressed out, where are you right now? And they will give me a number. And then after we cycle through, you take a deep breath, and often we cry. I cry with them. Um, but the number goes down because you're not just burying these feelings inside, you are expressing them, you're giving them a voice. And maybe it sounds woo woo to people. It sounded woo woo to me where I first heard about it from John Gabriel and the Ortner siblings. It works. You know, I remember I used to have a very stressful job, and I remember, before big conference meetings, I would just, because sometimes you can't go through all the emotions because you're in public and maybe you feel silly. You
Mhm.
can just sit here and hit right there and say, even
True.
though I'm stressed about this meeting, I love and accept myself and I'm okay. And even just 3 rounds of this can bring down your anxiety level. So
Beautiful.
it's
Beautiful.
remarkable.
Beautiful. That's great. I'm glad you shared that with us. Now, the other question, I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything. And I want to, I'm just enjoying this very much. Very, very informative. Thank you, AJ. And so I guess the last question is, how can our listeners get in touch with you specifically? I know you mentioned before, but can you share with us the different ways that we can reach out to you?
Thank you. I'd love to. I do have an email address dedicated only for those who want to work with us or who have questions or who just need a safe space to come and talk. And that's ajnova, Nova, official at gmail.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out, ajnovaofficial@gmail.com. It's a private email address. I'm the only one who looks at it. So if you're concerned about my virtual assistant looking at personal messages, please don't be. As well as find me on TikTok at ajnova. That's A.J.Nova, because AJ Nova was already taken. So A.J.Nova on TikTok. And our website is under construction, but it will be soon, ajnova.com. So those are all the ways you can get in touch with me. I am in Chicago, Illinois, but I talk to people like you all over the world, and grateful for technology that makes it possible, because we have people
Yeah.
all over the world who need our help.
Yes. And I always say mental illness does not discriminate, right?
No.
It affects every
Mm-mm.
walk of life, every gender, every culture, everybody in some way. And if you yourself are not suffering in silence or suffering with a mental illness, you likely know someone who is. So I'm hoping that the people listening today will be able to share your story. It's incredible. And I'm so grateful that God brought us together at Bestseller on Fire back in July in
Yes.
Dallas. So thank you again. And with that, I'll just say goodbye and thank you for your time. And if anyone has any further questions, you can reach out to AJ, or if you have any questions around OCD, anxiety, or depression, I'm also available as your OCD coach at www.theocdcoach.com. And we will talk later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.